Digital Hospitality. I'm your host, Sean Walchev. This is a Cali BBQ Media production. I'm really excited about today's episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. I have the CEO and co-founder of Meez, Joshua Sharkey. This is his first time on this show. Once I realized that, I'm like, Josh, how have I not gotten you on this show? If you're listening for the first time, we appreciate it. We believe that every business needs to be digital first, especially brick and mortar businesses like restaurants. We also believe that every business is in the hospitality business, whether they know it or not. We started this crazy show 7 years ago when no one was listening and no one was watching. And now we're grateful that we have a community of people, business leaders, restaurateurs, sales professionals, technology professionals all over the world that tune into our show. So thank you. But Josh, welcome, man. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Technically, I think I have been on this show in that you reposted the podcast that our podcast on
I did
your
repost
thread.
I reposted my appearance on your show. Well, let's start with that because we believe deeply. Obviously, I have my hat that says "Be the show, not the commercial." We believe in content. We believe in storytelling. We believe in H to H, human to human, and we tell lots of our friends that are technology founders the power of podcasting, the power of storytelling. You're one of the best, and I don't say that to blow up your ego, but you're really good at what you do. You're really good at asking questions to the guests that you have on your show, the Meez podcast. Can you share why did you start the podcast, and what's the ROI of podcasting for those that are listening and that are nervous about pitching the idea of podcasting to their board of directors or investors?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. I'm very humbled to hear that from Be Best, which is you.
I
Um,
appreciate that.
and I'll start with why the podcasting because honestly, it took me a long time to bite the bullet because I'm somebody that plans meticulously and wants to know that um, there's a clear path to how I can do this consistently. I think what the for me, if you can't do something consistently, it doesn't matter if you can do it really well once. You have to do it consistently all the time. And I knew that I wouldn't start it until I had some sort of plan. And my biggest sort of blocker was, is it worth it? Is it worth my time? Because I knew it was going to be a huge time investment, and it is. It's not a small time investment. It gets smaller over time as you get better at it. But the ROI is both very quantitative and also not at all. In that it's we can very clearly tie business that has come in directly because of the podcast. We can very clearly tie customers that have expanded and just new customers that have reached out just because of the podcast. But I think that when you say why should people podcast, I think the broader thing is why should people tell their story? Because
I
really, whether
agree.
you're doing it through a podcast, whether you're doing it walking down the street, whether you're doing it posting, that's a lesson I learned early on because I failed miserably at it. I was a chef most of my career, um, and I was really good at it. And then I started this restaurant, and we had really good food. We got really great awards, and we thought that was enough. And and I learned the hard way that it doesn't matter how good your product is, how much you care. Those things are very important, but you also have to have a story. People connect to stories far more
Yeah.
than they do to products. So the podcast is just one medium in which that that happens, and there's also just so many other sort of secondary and tertiary benefits from it. Of course, you're building an audience, right, which is really important. You're also building, hopefully, trust if you're being authentic. Um,
Yeah.
but you're also learning so much. You learn so much from every person that you get on there. You can ask, you get this sort of cheat code of how you get to get more people that you can ask questions to, whether it's people that you've never met before, or oftentimes in my case, it's friends of mine that because of our lives, we don't get to talk a lot, where I can
Correct.
have them in a room and just ask them a bunch of questions that I might not have time normally because when we're on a call, I'm asking them about their kids or,
Yeah.
their health or something, and we might talk about that. But I think it's invaluable. The impetus for why I started the Meez podcast, outside of just knowing that I think, we wanted to make sure that we could, start telling stories, was we do a team summit every year for Meez. My team is completely remote, so they're spread out across the world. And, we have, East Coast, West Coast, in the middle, down south. We have South America, all over. And so we fly everybody in from around the world and we meet someplace. The first year was in New York, and a friend of mine, the chef, incredible chef named Wally Dufresne, spoke at that summit, and I wanted him to just talk to my team, mostly made up of technologists and product people and things, um, and of course chefs. I wanted him to talk to them about innovation and creativity and the 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 why behind it and the how and how he thinks and his sort of thought process around what makes an environment in which you can be creative and innovative, and where where did he bridge art and commerce, where did that fail, and it ended up being this 2 hour talk, and it was really incredible. And every single person afterwards was like, oh my gosh, this needs to be a podcast. You gotta you have to podcast, you have to publish this. And so then we did. That became the first 2 episodes of the podcast, and
Amazing.
then it never stopped from there.
I think for me as a podcaster, I really dislike the word podcaster, primarily because people think a certain thing. Like there's a subjective reaction towards what it is. You know, people think audio storytelling, they think Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And, we live in a world where omni-channel is important. So a long form podcast like this, you and I have a conversation for a half hour, 45 minutes. I get to learn about you, your thought process, what Meez is, what you're building. But then a lot of the people that have told me, Sean, I love your show, they're actually not even subscribed to our podcast,
That's right.
which goes to the reach of internet storytelling. And I think when I think of the fear that owners and founders have towards investing time in storytelling, I think a lot of that goes to, well, why? Well, what are the analytics? And to your point, you can directly trace business that has come from your podcast or expanded business or different business partnerships because you were willing to do the work. Um, can you share a little bit more? How do you track that?
Well, some of it, how we track it is pretty, um, um, just mixed and matched.
Non-scientific?
Yeah, well, like we have a way to, if you come into our ecosystem, to say you heard about us from the podcast,
Yeah.
we ask everybody how you heard about us. So a lot of that we can just tie back to, you know, um, did somebody get into a meeting, or did they close, or did they do come through self serve, and where how did that happen? So a lot of that of how we track it is through the podcast. But I learned quickly though that you know it's helpful to do that, but it's likely only a fraction of the people that actually come through. And I mean, you know this because you understand marketing. There's the rule of three touches, right? It takes at least three interactions
At least.
with your business, at least, right? Where for someone to actually come into your ecosystem. So they may have heard our podcast and then saw an email and then spoke to you and then they came in, right? And so that there you have this sort of skewed sense of lead generation because you assume it's from this thing. So you have to really believe that
Yeah.
it's accretive, which it totally is. But it's also accretive not just in terms of lead generation, but I think a good friend of mine who is a I look up to him as a business leader, and also from a media perspective. He's been for the last 20 years just going out of his way and has mechanisms in place and systems in place, and also just a team to help him remember to help people, remember to send them like, hey, happy birthday, hey, I
Hmm.
thought about you. And we underestimate the value of just creating connection with someone without anything required in return.
Yeah.
um, and that may it seems altruistic, but it may be a year or 2 years down the road. But these things all sort of start to snowball, right? You have this person on your show, you learn about this, you guys have something in
Yep.
common, and then they introduce you to this other person, and she's incredible, and then they it snowballs. And that doesn't happen from a one-off thing. You have to sort of believe that the entirety of the network is what makes it happen.
Why does Meez exist?
Well, the very base reason, selfishly, is that I was a chef for most of my life, and I was just really pissed that there was not a recipe tool built for us. um, and so the first thing I wanted to do, independent of thinking about anything other than like, hey, this would be awesome and why don't we have it, is to just build the best recipe software in the world. I think too often, most often, it's expected that we conform to the software that we're given.
Yeah.
And really, the software should conform to how we operate. And that's what, that's why I built Meez. Why we exist is because I truly believe that every single restaurant, every single kitchen should be able to be both innovative and profitable. Those seem like, okay, why say both of those things? But too often it doesn't. Both of those things are not aligned, right? Like I know too many great chefs or great operators who had incredible food, put their heart and soul into it, worked 100-hour weeks, won awards, and the restaurant still failed.
Yeah.
And I know the opposite being true as well. And I think that that doesn't have to be the case. There's no hiding behind the fact that we are art and commerce. Like that's just what this world is. It can't be only one, right? You can't just be mechanical. You have to have some sort of like vision. You have to have some sort of idea. You have to have a product that people can connect to, and you have to be able to understand unit economics and build a profitable menu and make sure it's consistent. And that's why we exist, right? Yeah, we want to sort of be the place where you can make sure that you're not only building delicious food, but also building profitable menus. And that all happens before you ever see a report, in your financial system about what happened.
Laser accurate food costing. How do you do it?
Hmm.
Well, let's how many restaurants are currently doing it? What percentage of restaurants have laser accurate food costing?
Well, in the industry, it'd be hard to say. Like less than 10% of restaurants have their recipe data in
Really?
some sort of finance system, and of that, a fraction of that actually have the total, all the recipes or the actual yields conversions. I mean, you take a whole podcast to explain the all of the details around it, but the TLDR is, a recipe is not just sort of a list of a couple of ingredients, and forgetting the qualitative piece of this, of like why it needs to be, expressed in a way that people can execute and that's very explicit and that people understand how to make it and things like that. For it to have laser accurate food cost, there's so much work that goes into knowing the yields and the conversion of all these things that most people just give up on it. They say it's not worth it, and they say the juice is just not worth the squeeze. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter what the yield is when I peel and shred a carrot, or if I you know take the bones out of this halibut, because I have a back of the napkin thing and it's good enough, and it's not good enough, especially not anymore. um, and those every point counts. And to get laser accurate food costs, you have to know the yield of every single ingredient. You have to know the yield when you prep that ingredient, and you have to know the conversions if you're going to use it by a weight or a volume or a piece. But nobody has all that information, and so everybody was just sort of building it themselves. So we centralized it. We spent many years, and we still sort of enrich this database of all that data, so that you just write half C carrot shredded, and however you want to write it, and we translate that into how you want to see it in a recipe, and in the back end make sure it's laser accurate.
What's the most difficult part about building a restaurant technology company?
Oh my god. I think it's a really great question, and it's I've learned so much over the last 4 or 5 years. And I think the hardest thing, if I'm being honest, is for a very long time I knew exactly what I wanted to build, and it was just very clear for so long. Here's what we're going to build, and we're going to keep doing this. And then you get to a point where you have thousands of people using this product, and you get to a point where then you can start to segment all those folks, and who's getting the most value, who's using it the most, how are they
Yep.
using it. And then you realize there's actually sort of orders of magnitude of opportunity of things that you can build, and which one do you build? And which one do you double down on, which one do you sort of dial back on? And obviously you have to have a clear vision in order to make those decisions. But knowing which things to build and where to deploy your time and energy to make sure that you get that really really tight, so that it's defensible and that you're the best at it, that's really hard.
It's really interesting. I just last week was in New York City at a Google event, restaurant specific Google event, and to hear from product managers at Google the challenges that they have when they're developing new products and essentially shipping them out to the world, hoping that us business owners are going to find the Google business profile specific tools that have been built for me. But then hearing, the rest of our friends, other podcasters, industry professionals, the Troy Hoopers of the world, also in there going, I had no idea that existed. And I'm also on the Toast Customer Advisory Board, and a company like Toast that has 175,000 restaurants. They have so many great products that they're developing, shipping out to the world. And how do you get that out to all of your customers in a non-annoying way? People are really excited that you build something that's a new product. How do you get that out? How does Meez do it?
Yeah. Well, we tried to ship early and get feedback. Um, the one of the one of the challenges in even just in a B2B space, but then if you think about a vertical B2B space like restaurants, it's a restaurant's a big industry, but it's actually somewhat small if you think about the opportunity of getting statistical significance of a thing that you want to release, right?
Mm-hmm.
Google has billions of people to use a product, right? So not just restaurants, but everybody, right? So
Yep.
they can release something and get a lot of statistical significance around things that happened, people what people do with that product. Even Toast, which is they're the biggest, right? They're huge. 175,000 is relatively speaking small to compared to what
Correct.
someone like
It's
Google can do.
crazy. It's crazy to think. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, and also in B2B as opposed to B2C, you have to be very careful not to be disruptive, right? So if you introduce something that disrupts the day-to-day operation, well, that's
correct.
bad, right? And that you have to be really careful about that as well. And you know, people don't have a lot of time to, the customers being very generous, and a restaurant operator being very generous to give you their time to give you feedback. We love it when we get it, but we don't expect it because who has time, right? We're running this
Mm-hmm.
thing that never really stops. So for us, we do try to sort of release things and get feedback. A lot of it, I'll be honest, does rely on like just there's some intuition on my part of like things that I always wanted or struggled with, and we use that often in thinking about the product. Um, but it's just a challenge. It's just a challenge no matter what, because again, even if you think about that 175,000 people, those 175,000 businesses from Toast, if you segment them, there's a lot of different segments that
Yeah.
are not correlated, right? Where they're not doing the same thing. A pizza restaurant thinks very differently from a full service, fine dining restaurant. They're completely different, operations. So you have to, you also have to segment because you're gonna get different, you're gonna get different insights that might skew, how you think about, updating the product.
So I remember when we first opened up Cali Barbecue in 2008 and we were trying to build out our menu. We were taking over a breakfast concept and we expanded the lunch menu, added a dinner menu. We were kind of just all over the place until we actually found barbecue and found our niche and started realizing just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it, and starting to learn about recipes and food costing and weekly inventory, all of the things that, in order to run a successful restaurant, you have to learn along the way. Recently, we've been doing a lot of content on YouTube. So YouTube specific, Cali Barbecue Media. I just did a video about menu engineering, and I realized that I've learned a lot, but I also don't know a lot. You're the expert on menu engineering. Can you give me, from a basic level, a restaurant owner that's listening to this, that's just starting their restaurant, what do they need to know about menu engineering?
Yeah, yeah. Well, first of all, I think the important thing is to remember that it's a verb, not a noun. And there's value engineering happens in a lot of different industries, right? And so when you hear menu engineering and the thing that you're given is a report or a chart,
Yeah.
that's not menu engineering. That's a report. Um, you know, when it's great to understand dogs and stars and which thing is driving the most revenue, which one's driving the most profit, which one is the best food cost. Obviously, all that matters, ultimately is the bottom line. So all those things, understanding them is important. What you do with that information is the engineering piece. I think that's what we built, and that's how I sort of view menu engineering is after you have that understanding of like, okay, here's the weighted amount of everything you've sold based on, hopefully you have all your food costs from all your recipes and they're accurate. And so here's everything you sold. Here's how much each of those things cost. From there, it's very powerful to understand, okay, what's my total theoretical food cost, right? And so this is the start of a menu engineering, right? Is you want to understand theoretically if I wasted nothing in my entire operation and I was perfectly, portioning, what would my food cost be? right? So let's just say it's 25%,
Yeah.
right? And that's because I sell, 18% of my sales is this item that's actually a 18% food cost, and it's got a great, and you can understand where, where the drivers are. Um, that's very important, right? And just knowing that, and knowing the delta between your theoretical food costs and your actual food costs on a line item is really, really helpful. I mean, incredibly helpful. Meaning, like, if just think of like the top 10 items on your menu, top 10 ingredients that you use if you have all your recipes in, and theoretically, I was supposed to use 8,412 pounds of chicken thighs last week,
Yeah.
and I ended up using 9,419. Well, that's which, by the way, happens all the time, especially at scale. It's a lot of money. So now you understand where there's this first piece of it is to look at a report and you can understand where am I falling short, where am I wasting, and then understand, of course, like why are you wasting and things like that. But for me, menu engineering is a verb because it's then what do you do with this information? And
Yeah.
for me, it means having a tool where you can say, okay, theoretically, if I improve this recipe and I can improve the food cost of this recipe that's in this menu, and I can sell more of this menu item because it turns out it actually has a really incredible gross margin. And I want to dial back this menu, and I'm going to switch this chickpea for that cannellini bean, and you start to understand the impact of each of those on your profit margin. It's game changer, right? That for me is when you can really start to see very quickly and immediately the dollars that you can generate without changing your operation at all.
Let's talk about integration. What is integration? How do you integrate with other technology providers in the restaurant tech space? Give me the current state of integration.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's a bit of a dirty word, honestly. Um,
Well, I think it's the most misunderstood word, to be honest with you, because so many people in sales, in marketing, at least from my perspective of the people that I talk to, they go, "Oh, we're integrated,"
yeah, yeah.
but really, it's not an integration.
No, that's right. And I think, okay, so let me just clear a few things up because there's basically like three, I guess, for me, like three levels of integration, right?
Okay.
There's an API integration, which is there's literally the cadence is probably real time or some sort of regular cadence, daily, hourly, where there's an API call that I can pull from that system, the data in that system, and pull it into an endpoint in my system. And so
Yeah.
it's right there. I just that's the sort of the top of the top of integration, right? And probably what people think of, right, is just I do nothing, and this is all integrated. Now, well, let me just go through the three layers. So there's this API integration, which is
Yep.
direct and usually real time or some sort of like regular cadence. Then there's like um, another type of that, which is simpler when there isn't API calls, which is what we call something like an SFTP file, where essentially it's taking that data from that system and automatically exporting it into think of it like a CSV format, and then
Mm-hmm.
importing it into my system, right? So we don't have this direct API call, but we're pulling the data, and we can pull it some sort of real time. It's probably not like hourly, but some sort of
Yep.
regular cadence. And so you have that data being pulled, and then you have like the most simplest one where someone is like actually exporting information from that system and then importing it into my system. And there are also there's like bots like Selenium bots and things that will like do that
Mm-hmm.
automatically as well. But those are sort of how you think of like integration. But this the caveat there is you can pull data from one system to
Mm-hmm.
another, but is it structured the same way, right? So Toast calls this modifier like this and uses this sort of nomenclature or this schema of how their modifiers associate to menu items. Is it the same in my system, right? And then do we need to transform that data? Does it work? Is it reliable? That's
Yep.
where I think it gets a little bit hairy, right? Is the more how reliable is the integration? Um, so I would be, if I'm a buyer, I'd be asking these questions, right? Is it an API integration? Is it an SFTP? How often can you do it? What is can you show me an example of what the file format is? Because those questions, if you can just get those answered, you're gonna learn a lot, right? Already.
Can you share a story about Bark hot dogs?
Oh my God. Now
A
that
failure?
yeah, well, there's a lot of those. What year is it? 25? Jesus, it's almost been a decade since that.
It's almost been a
Um,
decade.
that's nuts. Um, I mean, you want a failure? I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of those. A failure from Bark Hot Dogs. Well, you know what? I think the statute of limitations is up on this. Um,
Even better.
we signed a lease on Kyle and Sarah here. You can. This will be a good story for you.
Oh,
Um,
perfect.
we
Mr.
signed
Restaurants. Here
we
you go.
signed a
We clip
lease.
it for you.
Yeah, we signed a lease, and there's this thing called TI, which is tenant improvement. So typically, the landlord will pay for X amount of dollars of work for you as part of the lease, and this landlord had agreed to about $500,000 in renovations for us. Um, the building was built in like 1789 or 18 something. It was
Wow.
one of the oldest bars in the country, and we had to rebuild the whole thing from studs up, and it was a beautiful space. And we signed the lease, and it was about a year in, and the landlord still had not even started work. Um, and we were like, "What's going on here?" And and I can't remember telling the story. I don't even know. I think I can say this now. We'll
You
see.
can say it. It's
Um,
fine.
but they just were like, no, we're not going to do it. They're like, but you can do it, and we'll pay. Hire your contractors, get them to do all the work, and then we'll pay you back. We had the contractors, we did the work. It was expensive build. Like it was if we had to pay that much, we would have taken the space. Anybody renting, obviously, or signing a lease, there's like this AUV, and there's a math equation that you want to make of like over 10 years, how much revenue you
Hmm.
generate in the space, and what's the upfront cost. We wouldn't have done it. So we did the work, and then of course they never paid us.
Mm,
And then um, this
ouch.
can happen, by the way. They sued us because they could. They were a really big company and we were tiny, and they said, like we know that you can't do anything about this, and we know that we owe you this money, but we know that it'd be far more expensive for you to take us to court, so we're going to sue you for X amount of the lease. We were like, we're not gonna, we don't want to pay the lease, and we were stuck. We had like, oh my god, we had to pay these people for this thing, and we ended up leaving that space after like a year and a half there, and man, that was
Wow.
a big that was a big driver for me of like, I don't know about this.
I'm sure you have chef friends, people that have reached out to you about things that people should know when opening up a restaurant. I mean, the list is infinitum. You can go on forever, but high level, what's the advice that you give them when they're opening up a new restaurant?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think obviously the more you can mitigate risk with the right lease, I think obviously in the beginning is really important. The more you can, I mean, it depends on what you're trying to do. It depends if your first restaurant versus like if you're on your 12th, you know.
Yep.
Uh, so if we just talk about your first restaurant, um, the 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 less you can spend, the better. Just get open, understand what's the core of your concept, get open, start getting business in, get more business, get demand, and then
Great.
when revenue is being generated, you can raise more money, you can take out loans, you can do a lot of those things, but the more money you put up front, the harder it is, and typically you can sort of whittle down what you think you need in the beginning. Again, this is if you haven't restaurant opened one before for your first restaurant, the less you can spend, the better.
Can you talk about mentors? Do you have mentors? How do you reach out to them? Do you have regular cadence that you meet with them?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you
I have
pay them? Because there's obviously mentors that we have that we reach out to that will respond to our text, take a phone call, take a Zoom, take a meeting. But do you actually have like a business coach or a business mentor that you pay?
I have in the past, and it's been very helpful. It ends up being more therapy than anything else.
We need therapy.
Yeah,
It's fair.
which is
Yeah.
great, by the way. It really is.
Business therapy is
Yeah,
good.
yeah. Founder therapy is a real thing. Unfortunately, a few of my mentors have passed away in the last few
Oh,
years.
sorry to hear that.
Three of the greatest chefs in the world, two of whom were close to mine, and one of whom was a mentor. All passed away in the last few years. I find honestly like a lot of my close friends become mentors because we help each other. and I learned so much from them. And people that are in the trenches doing a similar thing that might be a little bit more ahead or even a little bit behind. I learned so much, and I think having that group of of people that are on the same plight as you is just so valuable. I do think that um, there's certainly a value in hearing from folks that have been through this 100 times, um, and we have a lot of great investors and advisors that help with that. There is a bit of like once you're out of the trenches, it is a slightly different perspective. Some of that perspective is good, and some of it is it's funny. There's mistakes that we make or decisions that we make that are sort of objectively wrong, but in the moment they're actually the right decision. They're
Yeah.
things that you would never do again, but you had to do it at that time. So I do think that I say this, often that you know, I don't take anyone's advice, but I index everyone's, and that's more true for those advisors than anybody else.
So I was live streaming from our restaurant this weekend. Our team was doing the barbecue prep, getting ready for NFL Sunday, and we started talking, in the chat about what are things that we'll never do again as a restaurant. Like the things that we PTSD we've put into the back of our mind. It was like we did the ladies' night special, and we thought it was a great idea because the bar was slow, and we wanted to bring people into the bar, and we would bring men and women into the bar until we got sued for having ladies' night. Like we actually had a lawsuit that we had to settle,
Wow.
an ADA lawsuit that we had to settle, which was a very expensive lesson.
Jesus. Sorry,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. Welcome to California. Might be better in New York.
That's nuts.
But what are the things? Give me one thing that you'll never do again. And I say never with a caveat of obviously we're in business and
Yeah.
we things change. But right here today, 2025, end of January, what's something that Meez will never do again that you
Oh,
tried?
gotcha. I didn't know if you meant in a restaurant or
No, I could. You could go restaurant too, but
well, because the first thing that came to mind in a restaurant is designing my own stainless steel pieces. I used to do it all the time,
did you
and
save money?
I'd saved a couple bucks, but in the long run, not at all. And it felt good, and I loved drawing exactly how I wanted it and where the
Yeah.
triangle would fit. And then I'm like, one, what the fuck am I doing? Why am I
Why
spending
am I
all this
spending all
money?
this
And
time
two,
trying to?
like someone does it way better.
Yep.
But it seems like that thing like, oh yeah, I could do this.
Of
Stainless
course.
steel. I got my stainless steel guy in Brooklyn,
It's
and
probably one of the worst things about restaurants is that we feel like we can do any of it.
sometimes it's actually less helpful to know uh, a little bit more of the detail. Like stainless steel. I started learning about like there's different layers, there's different levels of stainless steel, and you got your use, and some is thicker and thinner. And so I knew enough to know that I shouldn't be to where I actually shouldn't have been talking, but I did. And so I would go to these places and design these pieces, and they were probably like, "Who is this guy coming here?" And I would never do that again. It
Yeah.
in Meez, I mean, there's it's gonna take me a minute to think about like what I would never do again. I'm just too in it right now.
Too close, too in it. What's the best place for people to keep in touch with you? Tell us about the show. Tell us about the network.
I'm on LinkedIn. Hopefully more often now than I have been. And I mean, I'm actually not on the other platforms often. I mean, I'm there, but I don't go on them. But I get messages. The show Meez is really just an extension of what we do. The Meez podcast is an extension of Meez, our company. And Meez is a recipe software technology company for any kind of professional kitchen that wants to store, organize, and leverage their recipe data to make good decisions. The podcast is an extension to that, and it's everyone um, in the industry or adjacent to it that's sort of bridging art and commerce to to be creative, be innovative, and also think through how to be profitable.
And where is Meez showing up industry wide this year? What shows are you going to be at? Where can people find you?
We'll be at a lot of the shows this year, actually. So I think we're at RLC and FS Tech and Create and um, we'll be at a bunch of them. Ursula,
Sweet.
shout out to Ursula. She runs all that, and I think we'll be at a lot this year. We're also doing, which I think we're going to be doing some with you, doing more just events,
Yeah.
independent shows, and just meeting our customers where they're at in cities. So we'll be traveling around to different cities
Awesome.
and just having having fun really and documenting it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, part of the extension of this show, Digital Hospitality, we're trying to do more, not just virtual. We're doing more virtual than we've ever done. If you guys are watching this, please join our live show. We do that every Wednesday, every Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern time, 6 p.m. London time. But that's a chance for you guys to join the podcast. But yes, in person, whenever I'm out and about, we want to show the best restaurant technology in real life. So we're going to be showing off the best. The people that are actually using it. It's one thing to see a deck in a demo. It's another thing to talk to a restaurant owner in his kitchen, going through the recipe software, showing us the toast tab. How do they use it? How do they set it up? So we're really excited about that kind of content. But Josh, it's been an awesome. I could probably talk to you for another 2 hours. So we're going to have more content with Josh. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for what you're doing for the industry.
Thank you. Thanks for making sure that we all keep telling our stories.
Hey, and I'm serious. Please follow his podcast. Josh does a great job asking smart questions, deep questions, thoughtful questions. I know a lot of people think everyone has a podcast, but there is an art and a craft to consistency and asking the right questions. So definitely check out his show because he's doing great work.
Appreciate that.
And that's it. As always, stay curious, get involved, and don't be afraid to ask for help. We'll catch you guys next episode. Boom. And now's it recording.